This is from Carl Jung. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Hello and welcome to Half Moon. I am Kaylee. I am currently making blueberry muffins right now. So I'm gonna have to pause this in the middle and get them out of the oven. And I have to tell you that it literally smells so good right now in my apartment. It is like such a cozy feeling to be making blueberry muffins. I made them with some buckwheat, which I've never done before, so I'll let you know how that goes. But welcome. We have crossed a threshold right now. We are just passing an eclipse, and we are also right now in the autumn equinox. So this is a part of the year where spaceship Earth is making its way around the sun, and the axis of the Earth tips in such a way that now day and night are equally timed. So basically what this is this is our initiation biologically, evolutionarily, into the descent towards winter. So this period of time takes place every single year, and this is something that, I really only started thinking about maybe 7 or 8 years ago when I was really starting off college. And this is something I find really fascinating because we as humans have come from the earth. Our bodies, our life essentially evolves from the earth, and our disconnection from the earth actually manifests itself in a larger disconnection. A disconnection with ourselves, with our true nature, with our spirituality, with God. And we at Half Moon are exploring our own influence on reality. But before we even get into today's episode, which, by the way, we're going to be talking about alchemy and the esoteric origins and what this really actually means in practicality for us, how we can influence our own reality, I want to kind of start off by talking about just this podcast in general and how I approached starting this. So this has been something that I wanted to do for years. I have recorded so many literal full episodes, one time even with a guest, and I've never published them. So why is that? Whenever I would think about starting Half Moon as a podcast, well, first of all, I would create limitations for myself. I would create literally 100 new ways to block myself from actually starting this. So for you to be watching this right now, this is a huge thing. I want to just share a little bit about how I handled that own inner resistance with myself. The first thing I did was connect myself to the larger purpose. I don't hear a lot of people talk about this, but my personal idea is that the fear of success or the fear of being seen or the fear of starting anything is actually an ego issue. Our ego is getting in the way. Essentially what I was saying is, oh, I'm so important that I'm going to block the universe's flow of energy that's coming through me by creating all of these limitations. I was like, wait, no. This isn't about me at all. I'm going to actually connect to this purpose, understanding that the only reason I want to do this is because it is part of my path to do this. I don't need to be in control. I don't need to create this rigid structure. It doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, maybe it's even better imperfect. Which, side note, is where I came up with this idea of really doing Half Moon in the most cozy way. I have a little candle, I'm in PJs, and that's kind of the vibe I want you to be on if possible when you're listening to this. Make this a comforting, cozy experience because the entire world can be a little bit dysregulating for our nervous systems. And when we think about spirituality or personal development, we want to kind of reframe that into joy, into pleasure, acceptance, and reverence for who and what we already are. And I think the best way to do that is to just have fun with it and be cozy. And also just, this is inspired by the fact that I have been so tremendously influenced by my close friends, specifically by conversations I've had with my friends late at night. And we really like to gather together at someone's apartment and light a bunch of candles and literally just drink tea and talk and see what comes through. And that is what I want you to be doing too. And personally, I think that this entire podcast or virtual school, whatever we're going to call it, we're going to work on that. This is not for everybody. This is for a specific group of people. I like to think of it as a collective. And essentially, what that means is that I'm not going to present this in a clickbaity way. I'm not going to necessarily structure this so that, like, I have to put a lot of force or effort into that. I am practicing embodying a new way of being where everything can be done from a place of rest. So that is Half Moon. We are exploring healing and human consciousness through rest, through pleasure, through joy, and relaxation. So if that sounds good to you, let's get into that. And also, because it's the first episode, I'd love to just introduce myself and introduce the reason that this is called Half Moon. Firstly, Half Moon is inspired by the work of Carl Jung, or Carl Jung, depending on how you pronounce his last name. But he has this really profound philosophical framework around alchemy, which is the entire topic of today's episode. And essentially, in alchemy, in the Jungian perspective, it is saying that the times of the half moons, or usually we call it quarter moon, which is confusing, but that is, the half moon is the time where we see in the sky equal parts darkness and light. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like duality. And here in this human experience, we are embracing our dual nature. We are not resisting or rejecting any parts of ourselves. Instead, we are treating it with the most pure and open and loving, compassionate heart. In Jungian alchemy, the half moon was this time of transformation, right? Because we have some half moons that are expanding. They are waxing into a full moon. And the other half moon is waning into a new moon, that time of complete darkness. But the half moon is that point in between where we don't really know if it's waxing or waning, unless we're paying attention to the sky, right? So my inspiration with Half Moon is really, really embodying that dual nature and embodying the fact that our evolution occurs through oscillations, through expansive periods and contracting periods where we expand into the fullest light and the growth, and we contract into darkness. And you might have heard me talk about this before, but the contraction is actually the exact very force that is driving us forward. The shadow is the very force that we must then look at and accept. There is this Jungian quote that maybe I'll try to find. Okay, I just found it and pulled it up. This is from Carl Jung. He says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Oh, so good. So I'm so glad that I said that, because that's the entire framework of Half Moon, is that what Half Moon is, what embodying the duality is, the light and the dark are symbols of the conscious and the unconscious, and what we do through these oscillations and through these explorations of neutrality and pleasure is we collectively are bringing our unconscious into conscious. because our unconscious is what is directing our lives. So profound. So who am I? I am a lot of things. But I'm going to start off by telling you a few key points. But you're going to get to know me more throughout this project. I'm Kaylee. You might know me on TikTok as Kaylee Sapphire. I love to talk about everything related to healing and consciousness, specifically because I consider my overarching identity an artist. That manifests in several different ways, but I am most proud currently of my work as an independent practitioner, where I have my own business at alchemybykaylee.com. This essentially combines multiple modalities of healing, including hair tissue mineral analysis, where you take a hair sample, you analyze the mineral contents of that, and I have my unique methodology of performing that analysis and designing a custom protocol, of course a non-medical protocol, for people to recalibrate their cells so that the cells aren't existing in this state of dysregulation, but the cells can actually come into coherence. My philosophy here is that healing cannot necessarily occur in parts when we're rejecting these different aspects of ourselves. We are mind, body, and spirit, and my work combines all three of those features. In addition to that, I have my background in a few different things. Firstly, I got my BS in biochemistry. And then after that, I was planning on going to medical school, and it really didn't feel aligned. We can maybe go into that story another time. And I ended up becoming an educator. So right after undergrad, I spent 3 years in Los Angeles teaching high school chemistry, which might come as a surprise to some of you, but this was actually one of the most profoundly transformative experiences of my life. I then received my certification in HTMA and continued exploring this other work and starting developing my business, really formulating that unique method that I discussed. But at the same time, I started naturopathic medical school. So currently I'm in my third year, which is another story we'll get into. But I'm also studying full-time. So there's a lot going on in my life, which is why you can see, I think the best way to go about this project is in our pajamas. Okay, let's get into what's coming through today. Really what we're doing right now is we are at this crux, this starting point of the autumn equinox when I'm first beginning and sharing this message with you. And like I said, this is the descent. And I'm actually picking up on something kind of beautiful and profound because it's a new moon right now today, right? And it's an eclipse, which is the start of this new cycle. But at the same time, there's something about the equinox, right? When there's day and night in these equal parts, just like when we're in a half moon, there's the light and dark in equal parts. And the part of the year that we're in now is actually the descent. We are going down into winter. This is the time where the earth releases its harvest. We think about autumn fruits like squash and apples and all of these different things, and our gardens produce the last harvest before the frost comes and the earth can no longer continue to bear that fruit. Now, this is the time where we end up with darkness longer than light each day. And the amount of time we have in light continues to shrink down. The fruits and the leaves that spring and summer grew now become brown and fall from the trees. And our bodies similarly begin to slow down by this complicated, beautiful, and intricate evolutionary design. Now, the foods that we eat and the ways that we nourish ourselves are altered, but also spiritually speaking, the way that we perceive the world and the way that we see ourselves is also altered. How I see this is that autumn is the descent into the unconscious mind, where we go into the deepest parts of ourselves. We go into this dark place where we actually experience potentially a dissolution of self, a dissolution of the former ego. And from that dissolution process, we actually are able to create the new. This is Jungian alchemy. But what exactly is alchemy? We know about alchemy from a very surface, superficial level, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not here to tell you that simple is bad. I've personally read the book, what is it called? The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. But we see alchemy a lot on the media and in spiritual conversations, and really what people mean by alchemy is change. They say, oh, I want to alchemize that. I want to alchemize that. And what they mean is they want to change that. But that's not the true essence of alchemy. So alchemy, actually, that word comes from the Egyptian word chemia. So this originated back in ancient Egypt, and chemia means the black land or the land of fertile soil. You can think about this dark, rich earth from which life can be birthed. So alchemy was this precursor. It was a proto-science. It was a precursor to the modern practice of chemistry because of its use of different chemicals and elements in procedural processes. But alchemy was actually a philosophy. What alchemists were trying to do was turn lead into gold, or create something called the Philosopher's Stone, which would grant its user immortality. But this goes a layer deeper, because alchemists were not trying to turn lead into gold through brute force, through just like using random things and seeing what would happen. Like I said, this was actually a philosophical experience, essentially coming from the concept within everything is the seed of everything. Okay. Within everything is the seed of everything. If you take a grain of sand through the eyes of the alchemist, everything, the seed, the potential of everything exists within it. Similarly, if I took a piece of lead through the eyes of the alchemist, it contains the seed of everything. So what the alchemists tried to do was look at the piece of lead and see the seed of gold within the lead. And the purpose of the alchemical process was to actually transform lead into gold by identifying and nurturing the seed of gold that already existed within the lead. This nurturing process was done through the sacred art of alchemy. When we consider how alchemy applies to our modern lives, one of the most profound quotes I've ever been told is that nothing stands the test of time unless it works, unless there's truth in it. This is something that one of my professors would always say during my first year. And when I consider this in the context of alchemy, I find this very beautiful pattern. Because like I said, this idea of alchemy and this practice can actually be traced back to ancient Egypt. It was then passed along and practiced throughout all generations of time. In the Dark Ages, in the medieval times, in the times of the Roman Empire, in the times of the Arabic philosophers and their pursuit of information and knowledge, alchemy was being practiced. And then during the Renaissance, alchemy had another resurgence. And after the Renaissance, it transitioned into the scientific revolution a little bit later, which then transitioned into the modern science of chemistry. And in this sort of was this time of hyper logic and this fixation on what could be proved and replicated. But there's also these elements of maybe losing touch with what we had as humans, what made us powerful and great. And I want to talk a little bit about that because a year ago I was in Greece and I remember going to the Temple of Athena and looking at that temple and thinking to myself, what was it in those people that, like, what compelled them to build these magnificent temples that would stand the test of time? Because to me, there's something about that process that is so innately human. Like ancient Egypt and building the massive pyramids and the Aztecs and Mayan cultures and, throughout the ancient Greek and Roman empires, and I could keep going. You could go anywhere in the world and you could see a temple or a church or a mosque that is so striking that stands the test of time. And to me, I perceive that as this human connection to deities and to reverence and awe. And without awe, we lose what it is to be human. We live in a time now of near constant distraction where everything's competing for our attention. We're being sold this concept that we have to work so hard just to scrape by, which is the reality for most people in our world. But the truth is, there is a different way of being. There are always different ways of being. And throughout human history, we lived in connection to the earth, with a worship and a reverence to God or to the universe or whatever you want to call it, whatever you feel connected to. The point is, as humans, most of all of human history was connected to something greater. The truth is that food can come from the earth when the soil isn't tilled. The truth is that the earth is an organism itself, and it is profoundly organized, and we as humans, through the fulfillment of our divine calling, are part of earth maintaining homeostasis. You only want to do something because the seed of that thing exists within you. It is because it is your nature to be that thing and to grow that seed, and you embodying that seed to become that metaphorical plant are part of the earth rebalancing. After a forest fire, certain seeds like grasses and brush can grow, and fungi can grow on the old burned wood to turn it back into soil. And there are these layered processes that are by design of the earth that bring the earth back into balance after a disaster. This is the same thing as the process of alchemy, because alchemy is simply seeing the potential, seeing the seed within that thing, and then nurturing that seed. You do not have to save the world. You simply have to become what you already are. You only have to fulfill the potential that already exists within you. When we consider the way the process of alchemy applies to us and applies to our lives, we can consider the fact that we only want something because we already have it. We only have that desire because a metaphorical seed exists within us. So how do we actually transform? How do we actually transmute? We simply look at the situation at face value, and we consider what we see, and from what we see, we identify the seed of what we want within that thing. The seed of your health exists within your sickness. It is by nurturing that seed of health that you then allow health to take over and transform sickness to health. Similarly, the seed of your wealth exists within your poverty. And it is by witnessing the seed of wealth within poverty that you are able to intentionally nurture that seed and allow it to grow and take over. The seed of everything is within everything. This doesn't mean that everything becomes everything, right? If I look at a piece of lead, I can see the seed of every single element within it, but it doesn't become everything. It becomes what it does because of the nurturing process of a specific seed within that thing. So you get to choose. You get to choose which seed you choose to nurture. You get to choose your response and your perception to whatever it is that you experience. And I'm here to tell you that it is not my place to tell you what to see. It is your place, and your place alone. You get to decide what seed you want to identify and nurture in your own life, and understand that it is through that dedicated art of alchemy, is simply nurturing the seed that already exists within that thing. Are you following? This means that we actually have unlimited potential. I share this idea with you because I've been thinking so much about the Renaissance. And if we look back to the time of the Renaissance, essentially what this was this very interesting sort of tipping of the scales that happened. So we had the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and I would love to learn a little bit more about those. There are so many theories about what was going on there. But what we know was happening was we had the Roman Empire pretty early, and it spread so far and wide across Europe and then collapsed. And then we had this period of the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, we can keep going. And then we had the Silk Road. And the Silk Road took place all the way from China through the Middle East and then through Europe. And through this trade route, there was this exchange of goods, but there's also this exchange of information. So information and ideas could be passed more freely than they really ever were before, and cultures were able to share their ideas in a way that was never done before. And what this resulted in was this kind of interesting concentration of wealth in a certain part of Italy. And this specific family that was extremely wealthy, called the Medici family, had a large influence over the culture, because what they did was they redistributed their wealth to fund the arts, to fund science, to fund humanities. And they were very, very inspired by ancient Greek and ancient Roman philosophy, which, again, like we talked about, had these sort of principles and values of education and intellect and spirituality and really understanding the whole person. One example of that really influenced naturopathic medicine is Hippocrates, and he said, "Let food be thy medicine," and he talked so much about the role of nutrition and the role of health and how it relates to the intellect. That being said, this redistribution of wealth and this re-exchange of power and this influx and this transition of ideas is what then allowed the Renaissance to blossom. Art and science and music and expression and humanism and philosophy all expanded, and this kind of tumbled into the development of the printing press in Germany by Gutenberg, and also in China. Similarly, there was a printing press made in China as well. You want to give them credit too. But what happened was, essentially, now, starting around in the 1400s with the printing press, information and ideas could now be spread widely and massively, and this influenced the entire culture of Europe. And I don't necessarily need to say if it was necessarily positive completely. Of course it wasn't. We had the scientific revolution, we had colonization, we had the industrial revolution, and all of these different things that exploited people through ideas. But in my personal opinion, this was actually largely, in my opinion, because of that disconnection between our innate connection to the earth and to something higher than us and to ourselves. And when we see this sort of degradation of morality in cultures, it oftentimes relates to that disconnection to the earth, to their cultural indigenous practices that every single culture has, and through a connection to spirituality and this higher purpose and connection. And now, if we consider the way that the world is and the way that our life is now, it is actually very similar. Similarly, we have these areas of wealth concentration, and we have our phones, and we have media, and we have this way that information is able to be distributed so much more easily and freely, and that means that ideas are able to expand. And I actually think that this is what is allowing a large collective of people to kind of metaphorically, maybe literally, wake up to the fact that you are a spiritual, eternal soul having a temporary human experience. You are expressing yourself in a dualistic physical form for a reason, for an experience, and you are also inherently a part of the earth, a part of a family, a part of a culture, a part of a collective. And by embodying the truth of who we are, we can influence the world and the culture and the way that our world goes from here. So, in summary, I guess, within everything is the seed of everything. And right now we are in a world that is experiencing a lot of imbalance and a lot of illness. But everything that the world is doing is an expression of the organism of Earth maintaining homeostasis. It is maintaining homeostasis, which is the state of balance and health. It is trying to get back into balance, and it is doing so through weather changes. It is doing so through shifts, but it is also doing so through every single organism that is coming out of the earth, including you and I. And you and I, each with our individual expressions of consciousness, have unique callings and unique purposes. These unique callings and purposes are simply expressions of the earth maintaining homeostasis. You are like a plant that is growing after a wildfire. You, in your unique individual nature, are an expression of the earth coming back into balance. And what you desire is because a seed of that thing, the potential of that thing exists within you. So your role now is to nurture that seed with the full understanding that the only reason you have that seed is because on this timeline you have the fulfillment of that desire, and even more broadly, because the fulfillment of that desire is a means by which the earth is returning to homeostasis through balance. One thing you might not know is that every spring we have different plants grow naturally from the earth that we consider weeds. And one thing I think about a lot is specifically the dandelion and the red clover. So when I grew up, I was told that these were weeds and that you wanted to get rid of them. And I think about that because usually those two things grow on grasses that oftentimes are sprayed with pesticides and with fertilizer. Now, what's so fascinating about the springtime is this is the time of waking back up and speeding into summer solstice. And the way that the earth speeds up is because in the winter, we go into this hibernation and our bodies slow down. And when we enter the spring, our bodies begin to speed back up and detoxify the accumulation that we have had in the winter. Now, what's so fascinating as the dandelion itself, the dandelion leaves and the dandelion roots are used for the kidneys and the liver to improve their function and detoxification of the entire body, both the leaves and the roots of the dandelion. And similarly, the red clover is so good at really moving lymph throughout the body, really flushing out the body as a whole, and it's very nutrient dense. Now, what this means is that the earth naturally produces the things that we need. This is an example of the earth maintaining homeostasis. So as we begin this, and as we begin our descent into winter, I really encourage you to consider who you would like to be when we are at the new marking point, which is the winter solstice and then the spring equinox. We are going through this journey of life together, and we are slowing down now. We are diving deep into our own individual unconscious minds because we know that this is just a temporary part of the oscillation. So I encourage you in this process to go within. And I leave you now with a little ritual that I encourage you to do if it resonates with you. And why rituals are so important, first, is because they connect us to our humanity. Similarly, as I said before, how we were all connected to the earth and to something divine, this was expressed through rituals. And I think part of the reason we've seen such a degradation of our society and our values is through the absence of intentional rituals. Now, I consider that for myself in just this unique autonomous way, right? Like spirituality in general is simply an exploration of your own personal autonomy. So for a ritual, I like to do is engage all 5 senses and really sit and be present with myself, which allows this sort of time around you to collapse into a single point and allows your energy to be really centered into a single point, which then allows you to direct that energy more consciously, more intentionally. So for this one, I'm just going to share what I'm going to do today to celebrate the descent. I have a few things. I encourage you to get something that reminds you of the summer and the spring and this former chapter of your life. And then I encourage you to light a candle and do a sort of closing ceremony for that thing. And as you do this, as you do a closing ceremony with yourself, you can say something along the lines of, thank you so much for all that the spring and the summer and the previous versions of myself brought me. I let it go and I surrender into the descent of autumn. You can say something like, I ask to be guided, I ask to be supported in this process, and I ask that it be made easy and light. I ask that you help me slow down. I ask that you teach me how to rest. What I'm doing is I have a bottle of face oil that I got in Bali in the spring, right around the spring equinox, that I've used every day for 6 months, and I just used the last drop. So that will be one of my items I do the ritual with. And I also gathered some rosemary. In my old apartment, it had this huge rosemary bush. And the other day I went back to that place and I saw the rosemary bush was chopped down. So I collected some of the branches because that rosemary bush was something I was so connected with. And it being cut down randomly felt like such a symbol of that closure. So I'm going to burn that rosemary. I'm going to light some candles and I'm going to do some writing. But I encourage you to really explore with this and create a ritual for yourself that feels really good. But if you made it to the end of this episode, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to connect with you more. And if it resonates with you, I encourage you to check out the Half Moon Substack, which is linked in the show notes below. This is where I have some writings. This is where I have a mini course called How to Alchemize Your Mind. And this is where I also post the podcast too, so you can always get reminded when a new podcast episode drops. And this is also just a great way to, message me. We can get to know each other, make this a little bit less of a one-sided thing, because like I said, this is for a specific group of people. It's not for everybody. So don't be surprised if we end up crossing paths in the future. I really wouldn't be surprised. But thank you for being here. Have a wonderful week. Be present, be kind, and go slower. Really embody the slowness, the very beginning of the descent into winter, the slowing down, the letting go. Allow what needs to be released to be truly released with absolute surrender, knowing that it is only released because something better is going to come. And above all, remember that within everything is the seed of everything. And you get to choose which seed you identify in any experience, in any circumstance, and how you want to nurture that seed. Goodbye, and I'll see you next week.